I would like to take a moment before we get into today's main episode and to talk about my sponsor for the podcast. Podmatch is a new podcasting site dedicated to all podcasters. The platform helps hosts get connected with potential guests to appear on their show, as well as allow guests to find podcasts that will give them a chance to share their story. Podmatch offers many tools to help organize your page, from to-do lists to episode planning to potentially appearing on a leaderboard. Podmatch has it all. The best part, you have the potential to get paid. And who doesn't like to get paid from home? I like to. With an easy sign up, you can start connecting with podcasters and guests immediately. I have been a part of Podmatch since the beginning of May, and I have got to say that it was the best decision I've ever made because Podmatch helps your podcast grow. It helps you get connected with people that have very interesting, very compelling background stories that are just waiting for their story to be shared. So if you are a host or guest and would like to start building professional relationships, explore more opportunities, and have your story shared, I highly suggest that you sign up with Podmatch today by going to joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to start expanding your network in seconds. I would like to give another huge thank you to Podmatch for sponsoring this episode. Now on to our main episode, and again, you can sign up at joinpodmatch.com/lethal venom to begin your podcasting journey today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lethal Venom Podcast. This is a show where I talk about anything I want with the honest to God truth, no lies told. Today, we have an extraordinary guest whose journey embodies resilience, leadership, and deep spiritual transformation. We have Mr. David Richards. He is a former Marine Corps officer with 15 years of service. He's a corporate leader in customer experience at Cisco and a sought after executive coach specializing in executive presence and transformational leadership. His work has guided senior leaders at some of the world's largest financial and IT companies, which include Fidelity, Microsoft, and Cisco, helping them elevate their leadership and communication impact at the highest levels. But beyond his boardroom experience, his mission extends more. He is a #1 international bestseller author. He helps people awaken their divine identity and step fully into their faith-driven purpose. He uses a unique blend of biblical wisdom, neuroscience, and practical leadership strategies. So David is going to be joining us. He is here to challenge the way we think about success, faith, and personal transformation. So I would love to give a huge welcome to David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Noah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm really excited. Um, I just came out of a 3-day Tony Robbins event where we're focusing on software that he uses to manage his life. And it's a tool that he's used for 30 years now and has found a way to put it online and make it available to people. And it's amazing. And towards the end of the 3 days, one of the things he talked about was how to perceive your life as a hero's journey. And it struck me because I knew that concept. I grew up reading mythologies and different stories, and I certainly seemed like that resonated with you. Read like Achilles or I don't know the Odyssey. I know that Christopher Nolan's coming out with a book like or a movie for the Odyssey, and I think what's sometimes lost in us is that idea of life being a hero's journey is really true for all of us. And for me, that really didn't hit home until the last 5 years, really going into the pandemic. So, what I'd love to start with is just give some background to people and then focus in on the last few years and how much of what you said applies. So, faith, neuroscience, what that actually means, because that may be new for a lot of people, what neuroscience really is, but how those two are really intricately linked to one another and related to one another. So I grew up in the military. My father was in the Marines for 31 years. My brother served 26. And it wasn't that that is what I wanted to do because I hated the Marine Corps growing up, which I'll explain in a minute. Um, but growing up in the military is a very unique way of life. And I mean that in the terms of you're not looking to sell anything, you're not working on your entrepreneurial skills. We moved every 2 or 3 years, and this was well before FaceTime and instant messaging and chat and everything else and social media. So I was leaving friends behind after thinking that we're going to be, throwing myself into relationships. When you're a kid, you don't necessarily think about, oh, I'm only going to know this person for 2 years, so I'm not going to get too deep into our friendship because it's going to be painful when we leave. You don't think like that. Um, and it was, in some ways, it was really beautiful. I had the chance to grow up in Japan for 3 years. When I was in fifth grade, we lived in Okinawa, Japan, which was amazing. But before that, when I was in kindergarten, we lived in a place called Hyattsville, Maryland, which was just outside of the University of Maryland. And it was the one time that was unique in my childhood that we lived off base for an extended period of time. And this was back in the time of the dinosaurs, way back in the 1970s. Also during the end of the Vietnam War, when the war wasn't very popular here in the United States, and the fact that we lived out in town and my dad was the only person on our block who wore a uniform, I don't know that people necessarily had a different perspective on seeing him go to work every day. There was one incident that comes to mind that I'll share on in a second, but it was so diverse and such a unique experience living out in town because when you live on a military base, everybody dresses the same, all the houses look the same. There's a very kind of it's almost like a throwback to 50 or 70 or 80 years ago. Like it feels like a very throwback kind of environment because there's so much safety and certainty aboard a base. So when we lived out in town, I had a really good friend up the street. His name was Danny, and we were best friends for most of those 4 years. We had a falling out kind of towards the end. But my brother, I have a 3 year old brother or an older brother who's 3 years older than me. Danny had a brother who was 3 years older and another brother who was 3 years older than that. So between us, we hung out a lot. And one of the things we used to play was we played a lot of war. So you would have plastic machine guns or something, and we'd go around because obviously with the war being very popular, that was a game to play. The thing was that Danny used to get um, very, he'd go into fits of rage. Like he'd get really upset and angry. And you never knew what was going to set him off, but it would be so violent sometimes that his brothers would have to hold him down. And so one day we were, because again, it was in the 70s, and in the 70s, you did not have helicopter parenting, but people used to, like as kids, we would roam the neighborhood. Like as a 6 year old, I am roaming the neighborhood with my 9 year old brother. We are unsupervised. We are blocks away from where we live. And that was just how things went. And one day we ended up in someone's backyard, a stranger's backyard, and there's some construction in the backyard, and we were playing, doing whatever. And at one point, Danny's oldest brother, the 12-year-old, said, "It's time to go home for dinner." Danny didn't like that. He got really upset, and his brothers started to move to get to him to calm him down, but it was too late. There was a hammer at his feet, and he picked up the hammer to throw it. So everybody turned to run, and he threw it as hard as he could, and it hit me in the back of the head, and I was out, lights out. Um, and the next memory I had was being at my house with a bandage on my head after having gone to the hospital. Danny was there with his mom. He had been crying. He gave me a coloring book. There used to be a TV show in the 70s called The Land of the Lost. I think about 15 years ago, Will Ferrell made a movie about it. Um, but he gave me this coloring book. And we were friends, but my life started to get weird after that. Like I had some bad experiences. And to speak back to kind of start to tie this idea of faith into this, we used to go on vacations in back in the 70s to Ocean City, Maryland. And one day, one summer, I think the third or fourth summer we were there, we came back and someone had burned a cross in our yard, which is a really interesting experience when you're 5 or 6 years old. So fast forward throughout the rest of my life, I grew up continuing on military bases. I also had this idea that somehow a woman was going to connect me back to God. That was kind of some idea that was impressed upon me when I was 4 or 5 years old. It's just a download I had. Um, and as I went through my childhood and increasingly grew to resent my dad, I saw that I was also wildly out of touch with what other people my age were doing. Like I was trying to romance women with flowers, and everyone else was drinking and learning about sex. And it wasn't, I had this sort of noble and chivalrous idea of faith at the time. And as I got into college, that started to erode because I realized if I was going to fit in, then I had to kind of get dirty. And so that's what I did. I ended up joining the Marines. I did 15 years. And as I got towards that 15-year mark, I realized I was living my dad's life to a large extent. So I made the decision instead of retiring that I was going to get out. And I got out in 2006 and went to Cisco. I got a job with Cisco, the giant IT company, which was fantastic. And it took me about 5 or 6 years to really transition out because I'd been in the military for 36 years when you think about growing up in childhood that way too. And the cool thing was I realized I could write. So I had published some things in high school. I got national recognition for a short story I wrote when I was in 10th grade. And that's what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do it. So now that I had a corporate job and I wasn't going to be moving anymore, I figured, well, okay, I can write. This is going to be really exciting and cool. And for 11 years, I tried to write horror stories because I wanted to be the next Stephen King and couldn't make that work for whatever reason. I'd write like 100 pages. Um, and then the characters would get flimsy, the plot would get thin, and it just didn't stick. And then in 2016, I was going through a divorce, my second divorce. Uh, but for Christmas, I started reading Napoleon Hill, this book called Think and Grow Rich. And in the first or second chapter of the book, he asks, what is the purpose of your life? And no, I was blown away. The idea that my life had purpose or that there was some sort of internal sense of orientation or navigation, a compass that could guide me. And it was so profound that in a minute, I said, okay, no more horror stories. I grabbed a pen and paper and I wrote my first ever purpose statement. And remember, it was the purpose of my life is to help people find their purpose in life. And so after 11 years of trying to write horror stories, I published in 2017 my first book, Whiskey and Yoga, about finding your purpose in life. At the time, I was teaching whiskey, or I was teaching yoga classes, and I drank whiskey. Um, but it was cool because it was like a childhood dream fulfilled. I became a #1 international best-selling author. The book I know helped people change lives, and I was so excited. And immediately after the book went to #1, someone who helped me make it successful reached back to me and he said, "Well, how are you going to help people?" I was like, I don't know. Like, I hadn't really thought that through. And he's like, "You got to have a platform. Like, what are you going to do?" And for some reason, I thought, well, helping people find their purpose, like Napoleon Hill's already got that out. There's other people, Tony Robbins. Um, so I kind of drifted for a little bit. That year in 2017, I'd also gone to two Tony Robbins events, one in New York City or outside New York City, and one in West Palm Beach, Florida. And what was amazing about those events, and I'm going to start to tie this all together as we get closer to 2020, is uh, you start to realize how much time do we spend evaluating what I believe or what I value? Like how much time do we spend on average assessing the internal nature of our architecture or psyche? And in the West, it's not a lot because the West is very much left brain dominant. The left side of the brain is it controls the right side of the body. That's the analytical, the kind of abstract side, but it's very logical and reasoning, and that's how Western society has produced what it's produced. But in terms of the internal journey or the more intuitive sense, the right brain thinking, it hasn't been dominant. And so you start to see this happening in the Tony Robbins world. The other thing that I started to discover was he is a master of neuroscience. So, what is neuroscience? Neuroscience is how the things you say and the things you think affect your nervous system. Because everything you say or think has an effect on your nervous system. If I get really upset and I yell at someone, my nervous system is feeling that because my blood pressure might be up, my heart might be pounding, and I'm shaking because I have so much energy. If on the other hand, I'm really cool or in a calm place, my nervous system's going to reflect that. If I look at you and say, "Oh my gosh, here's Noah, he's amazing, he's talented, he's got this incredible podcast," That's one perspective, and that's going to reflect in my nervous system. If on the other hand I say, Noah podcast, crap, what is this? That's a different perspective, and that's going to affect my physiology differently. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's just like a different tone,
Yeah, yeah. So
honestly.
but that tone, thoughts are things. Like our thoughts, all our thoughts are things. And if you're like, hey, it's nice to see you on the outside, but on the inside, you're like, I hate this person. There is going to be a imbalance internally within you because you're saying one thing outside, but the inside you're thinking something else. So there's going to be an incongruency between, say, your heart and your mind. And this isn't just, I'm not speaking from a philosophical or esoteric nature. They've been able to demonstrate and scientifically measure when someone is stressed out or angry, their heart and their mind and their brain waves are out of sync. And when someone's calm, the heart and mind are in sync. So I went to these two events and it was fantastic. Like being around the Tony Robbins world, you see like there's so much energy and there's intensity and there's screaming. And you don't realize what it's all about, but you're also looking at what do I believe and what do I value and what's my internal architecture, like I said. So I was in a relationship and I realized that relationship hadn't been built on solid ground. It had been built on a shaky premise to begin with. And I came out of those two events and realized that I had been, I had still kind of lived much of my life guided by this belief that I had told you about that somehow a woman was going to connect me back to God or connect me to God. And I hadn't discovered that person yet. And so I'd gone through two marriages, two divorces. This relationship had been built on kind of a false premise or shaky foundation. And I start to realize, oh my gosh, this relationship is not going to survive either because it wasn't built on a solid ground. And so, in one sense, I've made progress career wise through Cisco. I've published my first book, Fulfilling This Lifelong Dream. I've been teaching yoga now at that point for 10 years. Um, I had some success financially that I thought was successful, but the relationship piece was really the piece that was the one that meant the most to me and I couldn't make happen. And so as 2019 dawned, I realized that I was traveling for work more and I was kind of avoiding being home in this relationship. And fast forward to the end of the year, and we broke up. I we had shared a house that she owned and we split the bills. I could have gotten my own place, but I said, you know what? I have not processed. I realized I hadn't processed a lot of what I'd put myself through for the past 20 or 30 years. Like I hadn't really processed divorces I'd gone through. And those things we carry with us hold us back and slow us down, whether we realize it or not. So I moved in with family that I had close by, and I said, you know what? I'm publishing my second book in March of 2020. This is before I knew about the pandemic or anything happening, and it was really cool because I had an idea for my third book. And so, even though it was really painful to be at a place where I'm basically starting over, and I'm at a point in my life that I feel like I should have more success and more abundance around me than I do. Um, but I also had this crazy sense of optimism because I realized that by going to the Tony Robbins events 2 years earlier, 2.5 years earlier, I had started working on the inner architecture and realizing that there was something there. There was a structure to that, an alignment to that, and that was really exciting to me. So that was where the optimism came from, which contrasted so significantly with like I have been on this quest to find this woman. I've gone through lots of different relationships and have come up snake eyes, and now I'm living with family. I have all my belongings basically can fit in a public storage facility, you know, a garage or whatever. But I've got my second book and I've got an idea for my third book. And I just gotten promoted at Cisco, so that was really cool. So then the pandemic happens and I had I'd been a Spartan race runner. So if people are familiar with Spartan races, it's basically a race with an obstacle course that goes through it, and they have different distances you can go. There's 5K, 10K, half marathon, and then there's what they call an ultra, which is 32 miles and 75 obstacles. So, and to close out, I think the week before Thanksgiving, I did the ultra with some of my friends, and I was 20 pounds heavier than I am now. Had been drinking still regularly, although I'd cut it off in training for the race, and had started to recover from Spartan races by a friend of mine had got me some edibles, some cannabis edibles. And so I used to take some of those edibles, like an edible one, just to kind of relax after the race. And it was all good fun. Um, so 2020 starts, and my second book, The Lighthouse Keeper, is going to be published. My third book was going to be called Being, and it was based on our fascination and obsession with social media and just going into Starbucks or going to Chipotle and seeing people heads down on their phones. And it was kind of like, where's this leading us? Like, people are spending more and more time on their phones. Everyone's got that neck crane. Where is this really going to lead us? And so I'd also signed up for a mastermind with Jack Canfield. And if people don't know what a mastermind is, it's where you take someone who's had really incredible success in an area of life. They bring a group of people together, and collectively between you, you basically form this mind between you. If you think of it as a mastermind, it's basically like if you have a meeting with people, there's an idea that's at the heart of the meeting, and that's what you're trying to cultivate or improve or evolve. So in this case, it was with Jack Canfield, who is a wildly successful author. He's sold over 500 million copies of his Chicken Soup for the Soul series of books, and it was in Santa Barbara, California, the second week in March. Um, so I'm on the heels of the relationship. I'm living it with family. I've got a friend of mine who's about 15, 20 years younger than me, who's starting to say that I should come live with her and her husband for some reason. And I'm slowly flirting with developing a relationship with cannabis at a level that I didn't realize was going to be consuming very quickly. At the same time, I'd started reading a lot more, and there's a book called Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And I'd gotten into his work shortly after reading Think and Grow Rich and publishing my own book. And Dr. Dispenza has developed an incredible, he had a bike injury where he was on a bike and he got hit by a car and broke his spine and was told that he was probably never going to walk again. And through the power of meditation, he healed his spine and can walk fine now. And so he realized he was touching on something that was incredible and now teaches people how to do that. And people who've gone to his workshops have healed themselves of cancer, of Parkinson's disease, of other things that are incredibly traumatic brain injury. People who have been paralyzed for life have started taking steps and walking through their ability to use his meditation technique to heal themselves. So I read his book, and he's got meditations that you can purchase online. And I went out to this. So I started reading the book, and I said, well, I want to do some of these meditations. And I went out to Santa Barbara. This was after the pandemic had shut the world down. So I flew out on a plane designed for 250 people from North Carolina to Los Angeles. And there were about 20 people on the plane. I think I was the only person on the plane besides the flight attendants wearing a mask. Land in LA. I've been in Los Angeles before, and I know that it can take you 4 hours to travel 10 miles, and the highways were flowing easily. It was incredible. Um, so I flew there, drove up the coast to Santa Barbara, attend the mastermind. And during the mastermind, you spend about 45 minutes in the hot seat. So you have an idea, it's a product or business or service. You pitch it to Jack. He listens, the other people in the mastermind listen, and Jack provides you insights. And that's the idea behind the mastermind. So I wanted to talk about my third book, but they said, well, let's talk about your second book really quickly. And so we started talking about that. And I said, I've been trying to conquer love my entire life. In my last relationship, I wrote the woman um, a poem a day for 6 months. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 poems a day, just because I was committed. It's like, I'm conquering this. And after I stopped writing poems is when I started to realize that, oh, I don't know if this relationship is going to be it. Like, this isn't what I thought it's going to be. So I talked about that, and then I talked about my third book a little bit. And towards the end of my time in the mastermind, Jack said, "You've got a year." And it was the strangest comment he had said the entire 3 days that we were with him. Like he hadn't given that kind of advice to anybody else. And I was like, okay, what the heck does that mean, a year? So I got back home and I was supposed to go to an event in Florida that was canceled because of the pandemic. And I decided I spent the weekend I got back, I wrote the first chapter of my next book on my Mac. And then the following weekend, I said, you know what? I want to write by hand. Like I want to get a journal. I'm a left-handed person, so I've never liked my handwriting, but I want to write by hand. So I picked up a journal that weekend and started writing, and it was deep. It was like really cerebral. And I started mixing in the cannabis because I'm like, well, it's like lots of my favorite bands I know have used drugs, and that's a creative outlet. So let me try that. And it was wild because I was getting into a groove. There's a pandemic. I had this strange encounter with this really successful person. And I started doing these meditations from Dr. Dispenza. And one of the meditations is called tuning into new potentials. And it's the idea that if there's a version of yourself that you want to become, you think about what it would be like to be that person, that version of yourself, whether it's successful, whether it's, more health, more vitality, whatever the case may be. And you think about what that would person like, how you would act, who you would speak with, how you would be in other, social situations or whatever. And then you imagine that, and the idea is that you will bring that into that version of yourself to life. So I did this meditation on March 31st, 2020, and I was in the corner of the guest bedroom with the family I was staying with, and it was like 8 o'clock at night when I started the meditation. It's an hour-long meditation. There's really intense breathing to start the meditation. And after I do the breathing, then it was like I completely just shut off. And it was like this download into my consciousness from someplace else. And it literally felt like a download. It literally felt like my mind was being downloaded into. That's how pure the information came in. And it was all these themes about why my life had turned out the way it had. And it all had to do with relationships and love. And I came out of the meditation after about 45 minutes and I realized I just had my judgment day. Like that's how it felt. Like I was just judged. Like I had this judgment day experience. And it was extraordinary because now I'm starting to, as a creative author and writer, I'm starting to put stuff together. And one of the things that Tony Robbins says when you go to his events is life doesn't happen to you, life happens for you. It looks like it's happening to you, but it's really happening for you. So I've got the end of this relationship, the start of the pandemic, this strange encounter with Jack Canfield, a man I've never met before, but spoke to me in a way that felt like he knew me. And now I've got this Judgment Day meditation. And honestly, it kind of felt cool because like where I'm working from home now, like everybody's working from home, and that was different because now I'm seeing that, oh my gosh, I spent 8 hours a day in the office, but six of that is not necessarily productive. And that's not just me. That's true for most jobs. I think they say that people who go into the office are on average productive about 2.5 hours a day. But I realize many of the relationships I had in the office aren't with people I work with, they're people I see every day. And so I socialize, but I'm not necessarily getting work done. And so I had a lot of time and I was seeing more of my friends and only food places were open. So it was kind of wild. So that Saturday, I go to I go to work out with friends. The gyms are closed, but one of my friends was a trainer, and we used to go to a park nearby. He'd load his SUV up with weights and different exercise equipment, and so we'd set up like this little um, functional training outfit, and we'd do training for an hour in this park. And and then I wanted to write. I was really excited about writing my third book because I'm like, this is like there's some momentum here. Like all these things are happening. And as part of my soothing my ego after the end of my relationship, I had started following what I found to be really beautiful women on Instagram, and my friends and I would share like, oh, have you seen this person? Follow her. And probably in February, I'd seen this French woman who was a high school teacher. I think she's a high school teacher, school teacher. but she's also a semi-professional bodybuilder. And so I didn't feel like I was worthy to follow her, but something in her eyes convinced me to do it. Uh, so on this Saturday, April 4th now of 2020, I was working on my book. So I'm sitting on my bed writing in this journal, and I had two different color pens because it was really a conversation between these two different pens and two different ideas. One was the voice of doing, so like action, and one was the voice of being. And they were not necessarily in conflict, but they were opposing perspectives on things. And so at some point I took a break. I opened up my phone, and there's this French woman, this woman I started following a couple months earlier, and she's standing in a field of golden wheat, wearing a black dress and looking off to the distance. And it was cool. If you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, it reminded me of the movie Gladiator. It reminded me of Maximus's wife in the movie Gladiator. And within about 30 seconds, I knew I'd seen this picture somewhere before. Not that she had posted it before, but I'd seen it before. And within probably 15 or 20 minutes, I made the decision I'm going to write my next book about this picture. Like this picture is so inspirational. I'm going to write this about this picture. And in some ways, it was cool because that also led me to believe this is the woman that I've spent my entire life looking for. Like now I've built this really strong story between end of my relationship, pandemic, Jack Canfield, Judgment Day, life review, meditation, and now seeing this woman. For me, uh, I follow Christ, and so and I say that now. I was a seasonal Christian, I would think at best, for most of my life. Um, and while he was immediately a part of the story, looking at this woman, I'm like, who cares? Like, I've finally found the woman I'm looking for. Things got really even more extraordinary as April, May, and June went on. My friends increasingly were really strongly saying, "Come live with us, come live with us." And I think my friend, the woman in particular, I was asked to live with her and her husband, but I think she knew that I was going through something very spiritual at the time. So I had started spending more weekends with them. We were watching a lot of movies together, and I'd spend the night or whatever. And we're watching Thor Ragnarok, so 2017's Thor Ragnarok, and I had been trying to take them through the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they hadn't really seen much of the movies yet. And uh, it was a Friday night. We're all a little drunk or high, and halfway through the movie, um, after Thor has been defeated by the Hulk in the Colosseum in the gladiatorial combat, I something threw me down on the ground, and I was on all fours. And when I got up, I was like tuned into Thor's characters. Like I was experiencing the movie through Thor's eyes in this really wild way. And and it was this instantaneous thought. It was really instantaneous. And it was even so weird that I was like, is the movie going to end the same way it did, or is it going to end it differently? Oh, the movie ended obviously the way it always does, and I went to sleep. And the next day, I went to work out with my friends, and then I came back to the woman's house because she said, "Let's go for a walk." So we walked, and I was telling her what happened about the Thor experience during the movie. And we walked down the street that we normally didn't go down. And as we walked down the street, it was ended in a cul-de-sac, and one of the cars had the license plate Valkyrie, which obviously the Valkyrie played big in the Thor world. So that was really, really fascinating. At the same time, by as May became June, I could no longer write the book that I wanted to write. Like I'd been trying to rewrite it and rewrite it, the ideas I had, but it was all like it was too hard. There was almost like this psychological anxiety that came to me. So I started reading lots of books. I started reading history books. I started reading the Bible. I started reading books on quantum physics. And as the summer progressed, I got to the point where July 4th weekend in 2020, even though I was living with my friends at this point, I went back to the family's house. The family there was gone for the weekend down at the beach. And I just broke down because I was like, what is happening? Like all these events have happened. I'm trying to figure out what it is. And I realized I did not have, while I intellectually understood the story of Jesus, I did not have emotional understanding or mastery of his story. And I certainly didn't have physiological mastery. I didn't have his the conviction of his victory in my being. And so for the next, so I kind of realized for me that was the moment that I said I'm picking up my cross and I'm going to figure out what does it take to convince myself that his story is true. And instead of writing the book, my third book during this time, I just started journaling. I was journaling about the pandemic. I was journaling about what I was experiencing. I was journaling about what happened during the day. And it took me until November of 2021 to come up with a title for my third book. So I'd come up with a title and it might last an hour, it might last a week. And then I was like, no, that's not it. And I was so frustrated, and it was still really revolving around this woman from France. And finally, I was so frustrated in November of 2021. I was like, what is this? I said it out loud in my place. I'm like, what is this? And what came back to me was Love Letters to the Virgin Mary. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the name of my book. That's it. Like, I've got it. This is so cool. I was so excited because it made, like, as soon as I said it out loud, I'm like, that's it. I've got the title for my book. So fast forward, and then I'm going to I'm going to collapse the story over the next couple minutes here, and then I'll talk to some of the key points that I'd love to share with people. So I went into another Tony Robbins event in December of 2021, and this was a virtual event because of the pandemic. So it was all on Zoom, and this one had like 3,000 people. He had built a studio in West Palm Beach, Florida, so he could do Zoom and he could have thousands of people online. He's had millions of people online now at this point. But this event had probably like 3,000 people. There are 50 people in the Zoom room. There's 5 staff supporting the event during the 6-day event. And prior to the event, you fill out this 20-page questionnaire about why you're coming to the event, what you hope to get out of it. And so I unloaded all this stuff. I unloaded kind of my life story in these pages, just really honestly and transparently. And on the last day of the event, the staff in our Zoom room said, "Does anybody want to share what they've learned or what their experience has been a day with Destiny?" I said, "Yeah, I'll share. Let me raise my hand." So they unmuted me, and I said, "I've been working on something for the past 2 years that has terrified me, but it's also forced me to grow tremendously. And that is why I'm writing a story between King David from the Old Testament and the Virgin Mary." And everyone's like, "Oh, that's really cool. That's really beautiful. That's awesome." And after about 30 seconds, someone from the staff sent me a DM on Zoom and they said, "Tony wants to read your book when you're done." And I was like, Tony Robbins wants to read my book. That's cool. All right. I was so stoked. I was so excited. And it took me probably a couple hours to process. He was listening when at the exact, out of the 2,000 or 3,000 people at this event in all these different virtual Zoom rooms, he was listening to our Zoom room at the precise moment I said what my book was about. And that gave me a sense that there's a higher power at work in the universe for sure. So I took the rest of the month off from work. I wrote Love Letters to the Virgin Mary. I finished the first draft on New Year's Day, 2022. And then I kind of went into this psychological black hole where I couldn't sort of process what I'd written. And it took me until February to add the subtitle. So the subtitle for the book became Love Letters to the Virgin Mary, The Resurrection of King David, because I'd seen from 20 years ago, people had written a 12 chapter or 12 series book series called Left Behind. And in the last chapter of that last book of that series, King David resurrects. And so I thought, oh, that's good. That's good. So to kind of cut things to the quick, so through 2023, I really was now struggling with drug use. My marijuana use was a daily thing because I was so afraid of what coming down. I'd been using it to self-medicate and self-regulate, and now coming down from it, I was afraid of what I was going to find. And finally, in November of 2023, I committed to quitting. And I flew to Dallas with friends of mine to go to another Tony Robbins event. And this was after I'd made the decision to quit. And this was 15,000 people at this event. There's another 3,000 people online. And on at one point during the event, he plays a video because he talks a lot and he's worn out his vocal cords over almost 50 years of serving people. So they play a video, and it's him early in his career talking about how he used to help people stop smoking, like how he could help people get the idea of smoking out of their body. And towards the end of the video, they talk about he tried to help someone came to him and said, "Can you help me stop smoking marijuana?" And when they said this, I've seen this video before. I've seen this video like 10 times now, but when they played it, when they brought that part of the video up, they cut to me in the audience, the 15,000 people, they cut to me. And I was like, okay, that's a sign. Like that's a big deal. Um, but I was done with it. And in the meantime, I'd been working with one of his coaches for a couple of years, and I started writing a follow-up book called Love Letters to Jesus, and it was talking more about the heart of Ragnarok and the Thor thing. And I realized, well, that's not really going to help people. And so I wrote another book called Bringing God to Life, and I said, well, this is not going to really help people either. And after working with this coach for 2.5 years, I said, well, it's really, if the greatest test of faith is, at least from a Western perspective and under the auspices of the influence that the story of Jesus has had on Western civilization over the last 2,000 years, it really comes down to, has Jesus conquered death or not? Like that's kind of what the premise of that's what the idea. I said, if there is a greatest test of faith, what is it? And that's the answer that came back to me. And so I said, well, I'm going to write a book called Becoming One with Christ then. And I'll look at the lessons of King David in the Old Testament, because there's a distinct relationship between King David and Jesus in the Old Testament, or in the New Testament. And so I said, I'm going to look at that relationship and figure out what it means. So what does this have to do with neuroscience? How do you change your neuroscience? If you think of like a basketball player, like LeBron James or Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors, they shoot hundreds of shots every day. And they shoot hundreds of shots every day so they can take a fraction of those shots in real games. So they might shoot, I think over the course of Steph Curry's career, he's made like 2.5 million shots, and he's shot about like 13,000 shots throughout his career. So huge disparity. But he's got the muscle memory because he's done it 500 times a day for 6 days a week for 20 years or whatever it is. Same thing with Michael Jordan, same thing with anybody who's really mastered that. So when it comes to faith, how do you change your nervous system? There's something called affirmations. And people may have heard of affirmations where you say, I am smart, or I am genius, or I am successful, or I am abundant. That is one way of saying it, because anything we say I am after becomes our identity. I mean, it's common sense. I am is the beginning of identity for all of us. The difference between affirmations and incantations are emotion. So if I say I am a genius, that's an affirmation. If I say I am a genius, that's an incantation, because I'm using more of my body, I'm using more emotion. And that isn't just me saying something, that is me changing my physiology, because every cell in my body is saying I am a genius. There's the more intensity you bring to it, the more emotion you bring to it. So we have neurons that create connections in our body. So I'm guessing, Noah, that at this point in your life, you've tied your shoes 1 million times to this point in your life. So somewhere in your body, there's a neural connection for tying shoes. And you've created it, done it so often that you don't have to think about which lace goes over here. How do I do this? It's just automatic because that neural connection is so strong. So, and I can't take credit for this because I really picked this up from Tony Robbins, because he would say, I would be driving to an event in Southern California, and it takes hours to get anywhere in Southern California anyway, but he'd be driving for 2 hours and he would be doing incantations at the top of his lungs for 2 hours. So I said, well, if that's good for him, that's good for me too. I'm going to start doing incantations. So I would do different incantations. I would say different things. And some of it was, I thought, well, if it's really about, if the story of the Bible, the story of Jesus, and I say that in the context, not necessarily about the religions that have been formed around Jesus, because there are 45,000 denominations of Christianity in the world today. I'm saying if you extract him out and people don't get caught up in the orthodoxy or the dogma or the political affiliation that some parties have, or some Christians see with in political parties, and just look at the story itself, Jesus has several I am statements, like I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. And I thought, well, if the ultimate end state is complete unity, to see unity in everyone from a biblical standpoint, that's been the least practiced from what I can tell. But I thought, well, what if I just said his I am statements to incant them to kind of bring that spirit to life within me? And so that's what I did for the past few years. And it does transform, it literally transforms how you see the world. I was I was doing my incantations 2 years ago, and I'd been doing one about seeing his light in everyone and everything, and just saying that over and over. I see his light in everything and everyone. And I was doing it one Friday morning, and it was just like the lights switched in my place. Like it was almost like I got high definition TV for vision for a second. And then I realized the light that I saw in this picture from this woman back from April of 2020, I now saw everywhere. I saw that light. My entire life became that light. And it's really powerful. So when you think about the idea of faith and neuroscience, the idea that incanting what you believe is a powerful way to transform your nervous system. And it's going to have a physiological effect on you that then changes how you perceive the world and how you show up in the world.
You know, in your journey, you've explored different cultures. As you had mentioned earlier, you spent some time as a child in Asia,
Yeah.
particularly Japan. You've been to Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. So, how have these diverse influences shaped your understanding of God, spirituality, and leadership?
What a great question. I was blown away going. The first thing about living in Japan as a kid was it's so cool because, I mean, this was at a time, it's like the late 1970s, early 1980s, and less than probably a fraction of percent of US citizens had the chance to go to Japan. And everything was different there. You realize you are the minority. Like you're not like you, it's you. And the language was so different, the smells were so different. Being in Okinawa is subtropical, so it's like got beautiful coral reefs, brilliant blue water, but it is super humid. I mean, it's the most humid place I'd ever been at the time. And and then seeing how their belief system, there's statues of Buddha, there's temples where there's burning incense, but it's much more internal, right? It's much more internal. There wasn't, I think, in the West in particular, and certainly in North America, there's a tendency to perceive and project God as outside of you. Like that's, I think, for me, certainly that's how I grew up was God's outside or God's in the Old Testament, but there wasn't this idea that there's a presence now. It was kind of like back then. And in the East, in Okinawa, it wasn't like that. While we were there, we got to go to the Philippines, we got to go to South Korea. And so you see these different cultures. And what I took back from that was when I came back to the United States, I started to realize from getting hit in the head with a hammer, and here's something I didn't tell, I'll come back to in a second, but um, I started to realize that I wasn't completely present in my life. And I probably started to realize this around 12 or 13. Like I just had the sense when I got back from Okinawa, because I had a real my best friendship in terms of having similar likes, like comic books, Star Wars. We both were artistic. Had been on Okinawa, and then his family got reassigned to Northern Virginia. We got assigned to North Carolina. And when I came to North Carolina, none of my classmates, I think there was one other classmate who had lived on Okinawa, but everybody else was all America all the time. And so it was just a completely different experience. It got me into the idea of meditation because the sense of inner stillness that I perceived living in Japan, I was like, I want and I need that. So I started reading books on like Shambhala, like this mystical city that lives, that exists somewhere. And it was the idea that you clear your mind. And when you clear your mind, then you allow a thought to appear. And I was like, I don't know what meditation is, but my friends would be going to high school football games on Friday nights or going out to parties, and I'm sitting in my parents' living room trying to meditate in front of a Japanese sword. Like that was my journey. Um, then so I joined the Marines, and very early in my career, I had the opportunity. I went to Singapore. I'd never been to Singapore. Most of the Marines were out drinking. I went to the Chinese Japanese gardens. I went to the zoo. Um, we went to Somalia, so I was part of the initial landing force for Operation Restore Hope back in the early 1990s. And Somalia is a Muslim country, and so you hear the call to prayer, 4 or 5 times a day, and and it was wild. One, because Somalia was a country in decay. They were undergoing a drought and a famine. Um, but it was incredible to see also how seriously they took their faith. We went after Somalia. We went to the United Arab Emirates for a little bit, and then since then I've been to Israel, I've been to India, I've been all over Europe, I've been through Central and South America. Um, what I came to appreciate is that there are definitely obviously different perspectives on what people believe, and what I also came to appreciate, kind of tying it back to what we said earlier, was your life is up to you. Like the institution of church is not going to save you. The institution of Islam is not going to save you. The institution of Judaism or Hinduism, the structure is a frame of reference. It's up to you to apply the actions. And for me, as I started to kind of round out my experience, I'll share this with you. Last year, I went to the United Arab Emirates, and I'd been there. So we went to the UAE after Somalia, but it was a very different experience because I was active duty in the military, and I was, not only just dealing with what we'd gone through in terms of landing in Somalia, but there was much more focus on cleaning equipment and everything else. And so to go back to the UAE last year was fascinating because I was there as part of a trip with other people from the Tony Robbins community, in fact. And when one day we went to a mosque, and it was immaculate. I mean, just the size of it was incredible. Just the reverence they have is also very noteworthy. And then there's a fascination because there's so much sacred geometry in their structure and how they build things. And then after the mosque, we went to this place called the Abrahamic Family House. And I didn't know about this until going to it. But in 2019, the Pope and the leading Imam from Islam got together and they said, let's create a compound that honors the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while appreciating the diversity of each. But this idea that there can be a unity for humanity if there's a cooperation. And so it's why it's so one of my favorite experiences of my life. Um, so this compound, there are three buildings, and from the outside they all look the same, but when you go in, one's a church, and it's got a cross at the front, and then it's got these beams of wood coming down from the ceiling, which is meant to symbolize Christ's descent to earth. Then you go to the next one, and that's a synagogue, and so it's got the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments are facing Jerusalem. And then you go to the third one, and the third one is facing, I believe, Mecca, but there's no symbology. There's just this giant blank wall, and there's some incense burning, and that's the mosque. And when you start to look at that, what to answer your question specifically, when I started to look at that and look what the body of Tony Robbins' work, so he's helped probably 1 billion people over the planet. He's fed at least 20 or 30 billion people over the course of his career. And he's seen that despite the diversity of the human experience, there is a commonality to the human condition. So we all have 6 human needs. It doesn't matter your religious background, cultural background. We all have the same 6 human needs. He has broken down kind of the psychology of how people create meaning in their lives. And the more I've studied his work and exposed to his community and seen different experiences throughout life, it certainly led me to the realization that there is his work, I believe, points to the idea of a messianic figure. Like I think it's just that, and it's also understanding what that means, right? It's not about the reverence for the story that's in the Bible. It's following the path, picking up that cross and following the path. So in that sense, my takeaway to answer your question is I appreciate that everyone has their own experience and their own journey. And I also appreciate that most of us inherit our beliefs before we ever choose them. because we can't help where we grow up. We can't help who our parents are, and they are going to instill in us what they believe, what they've been told, what they've experienced. So, in that sense, it's made me more receptive to the necessity of diversity, while based on what I've learned from the Tony Robbins community, appreciating the universal nature of the human experience. I want to go back to what I said because I didn't include this, and I probably should have included this just to work in my storytelling. During the pandemic, I revisited the experience of getting hit with the hammer by my friend. And I remembered a memory that I had blocked out for 40 something years. And it was after that happened, I remember watching his brother carry my limp body down to their house. And I was like 15 feet behind them. I could see my brother. I could see Danny. I could see his other brother, but I couldn't get back into my body. It was a very kind of dark and shady picture. And as I came back to that during the pandemic, I realized I had an out of body experience. Like I had a near death experience where I was consciously seeing my body from outside myself. And to bring that full circle, at the beginning of this year, I found Danny. He lives in Virginia, and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I wanted you to know that you actually started my journey of faith when that happened, because I realized during the pandemic I came back to this experience and realized that if I was seeing myself from outside myself, that there's something that exists outside my body."
If someone is listening right now and they feel like they're stuck, whether in their faith, their relationships, or their career, or even all of the above, what's the first step that they should take to break through and step into their divine purpose?
Yeah, I would say, well, that's a great question. The first thing I would say was ask yourself, what is my purpose? If you don't ask yourself the question, you can never come up with the answer. And if you're focused or fixated on the world outside of you, if you want to change that world, change your inner world. And how you change your inner world is by asking yourself better questions, because questions are the answers. If you ask yourself a 50-cent question, you're going to get a 50-cent answer. If you ask yourself, why does this always happen to me? Your mind, your subconscious mind is going to come up with an answer. That's the way the mind works. If on the other hand you say, how can I surround myself with people who are going to help me grow? Your mind is also going to come up with an answer. So it starts with taking control of your questions. The other piece I would say to that is when I was trying to write, become the next Stephen King for 11 years while I was full time at Cisco, I didn't have a writing practice. Like I would work during the week and I'd come home on weekends. And my thinking was, well, I know how to type on a computer and I know how to write pen on paper. I should be able to write and magic's just going to come out. And it doesn't work that way. You have to develop a relationship with yourself psychologically. And for me, during the pandemic, when I started journaling, it transformed my life, because I realized if I can't express to myself what I believe or who I am, how can I ever hope to express that to anybody else? And if I'm trying to be liked if I'm trying to look for the outside world to validate who I am, I'm setting myself up for disaster. And in this day of age of social media, where people are looking to be liked or looking to be followed or doing stupid or exaggerated things to get attention online, you're going to get that attention, but it's like cheap beer. Like it doesn't taste great. It gets you a short-term effect. It's not good for you. If you really want to transform, that's an internal journey. And for me, what I've come to appreciate, I'd say now since the pandemic, I probably have filled 30 or 40 journals with my writing. And that has been the way I've sculpted my soul. So I would say ask better questions and develop a journaling habit to put you in touch with yourself. Because what you realize, in this day and age, there's so much fascination, rightly so to some extent, with AI. Like AI can do, like this thing that I saw last night with what the AI can do for this Tony Robbins app is incredible, because it's doing stuff for you. And it's like we're getting to the point where it is going to be, everyone's going to have their own Jarvis from Iron Man. Like that is actually going to be, we're getting to that point within the next probably 3 to 5 years. And yet that's all well and good. That Jarvis cannot take the place of you undergoing your own hero's journey.
Through this whole journey of finding yourself and learning more about faith and God, who have been some of your biggest inspirations and people you've looked up to during this whole process.
Yeah, that's such a great point too, because one of the things that Tony says is who you surround yourself with is who you become. And he says proximity is power. And first, one of it is what one idea is, and I read this from Jordan Peter. Well, let me answer your question really quickly first, and then I'll say why. Tony Robbins, as a Christian man, I don't think I've met anyone who embodies what Christ taught, not necessarily what the Bible says, because I think people have different interpretations of the Bible story and they don't allow for the passage of time. That's why people get fixated on the Ten Commandments when Jesus provided two commandments. And it's the focus of the Bible is meant to be on Jesus. It's not on Moses. It's not on Noah. Those are all stories that lead up to the Messiah. But I see that Tony, who is a billionaire, teaches people and treats people like they're equals. Like that's one of his greatest strengths is he can talk to someone who has no financial wealth or limited education and connect with them in a way that is sincere, heartfelt, and genuine. And I know I certainly believe, based on what I've seen in my exposure to him, that he does so because he believes he's guided to do so. And I've certainly, and through my own experiences with him over the past 5 years, I've seen that too. So he's one. Joe Dispenza, I've gone to a couple of his workshops, and just the realization that they have scientifically demonstrated, they have scientific proof that he has helped people cure themselves of cancer through his meditation practice. So the fact that we can self-heal and you don't have to be bombarded by all the pharmaceutical commercials on TV anymore that are telling you this drug will help you, even though it's going to give you these horrible side effects. No, you can heal yourself. It just takes discipline. You need to pull yourself out of kind of the matrix and get into your own life. Jordan Peterson is another one. So Jordan Peterson used to be a professor, I think, at the University of Toronto. He's become something of a popular person on the talk circuit, initially because I believe it was because of his political views. And then I think he took a hard turn into faith during during the pandemic. And so in November of last year, he wrote a book called We Who Wrestle with God. And that's what the word Israel means, we who wrestle with God. And brilliant book. I've heard him speak twice. And just his, one of the premises that he speaks to in the book is it calls to just what we talked about, right? The idea that God's not outside you. God is an internal journey. Because he says, if you look at Elijah in the book of Kings, um, Elijah discovers through his own journey that we don't find God in the earthquake or the wind or the fire, but through the still small voice within. And what Peterson says is that is a much more psychologically and relational definition of God, where the voice of your conscience or what you're aiming for is um, is you'll be attended to by those spirits. And so if you aim for, well, if the Bible says in Corinthians that we all share the mind of Christ, if Christ is the Messiah and the Alpha and the Omega, then you start to say, well, let me direct my thoughts towards that voice of conscience and see how that transforms my life. So those are three that immediately come to mind. Just certainly, I mean, certainly through my own developing a relationship with Christ and understanding how to see his light in everyone has been a huge component to that too. But those are the top three, I would say, immediately.
For people that want to kind of follow you more about your journey as well as check you out on social media, what are some ways that people can get connected with you? And what else? Do you have anything else going on? Do you have any other books that you have coming out? Just feel free to promote anything that you have coming up,
Yeah,
website,
no,
social media, and everything.
thank you, Noah, and I appreciate your platform as a voice to share my story. So I've got four books. You can kind of hear the evolution of my own journey as an author through the titles. Whiskey and Yoga is the first one. The Lighthouse Keeper is the second one. Love Letters to the Virgin Mary is book number 3. And then just at the end of May this year, I released Becoming One with Christ, The Lessons of King David, where I talk about how to internalize the journey of faith and realize that you are going to pick up your cross and you are going to go on that path. And as daunting as that seems, you will, the whole point of the journey is to consciously appreciate that Christ has overcome death. The idea that we die and go to heaven is a Western idea that has been around for the last 200 years. but it's really heaven comes to earth. That's how the Bible ends, and that's kind of the purpose of the story. So those four books are available on my website, David Richards Author. They're on Amazon as well. I'm on Instagram right now, David Richards Author. I've also got two courses coming out that go with becoming one with Christ. So one is called Being One with Christ, and that teaches you how to embody faith. So that course is available now on Udemy. The other course is on the Davidic covenant, and it looks at King David as the kind of the bottom dweller of the pit. So David writes in the Psalms about being in the pit, and when you look at Jesus as the son of David, which there are 18 references or so in the New Testament, there's a relationship there that I'm saying is essential to understanding how to resolve the biblical narrative. So those two courses are both on Udemy now. I certainly encourage people to check those out. And like I said, David Richards Author, you can find me online on my website or on Instagram.
Well, David, I appreciate you so much. Thank you again for sharing your story and just doing what you're doing. I think hopefully a lot of people that listen to this will find inspiration in there. And, you know, I don't really talk a lot about religion on my show a lot because it's
Sure.
such a touchy subject because I've got
Yep.
very touchy listeners. But
Yeah.
um, I appreciate you for being outspoken and bold about being able to speak about it. I think it's conversation that needs to be told, and someone out there that might be dealing with it. I always try to target those people that really need to hear the words. I appreciate you so much for saying that and sharing your story.
No, like I said, I appreciate it. And it is a touchy subject. People have hard understandings. And one of the things I just did over the last month or so was look at what's the ultimate outcome of the Bible story. And the reason why I wanted to pull it out of religion is just for what you said. It's such a touchy subject because people have the paradigm of what their religious belief is, but Catholics don't believe the same thing Protestants believe. Well, which Christianity is right? And so you kind of have to go back to the source material. And what I discovered through my own journey was Jesus talks about complete unity. Like you don't necessarily hear the sense of it because it's always aligned to the church. And it's, well, this person, like I was on I'll just share really quickly because I know we're coming to the end, but I did a podcast earlier this week. And the guy came back afterwards and said, I'm not going to air this podcast because you do yoga and yoga is against Jesus. And I was like, I don't see how practicing something to help me stay in tune with myself is somehow violating my relationship with Christ. Like that doesn't make sense to me. But that was his belief. And I said, I respect your belief, but I also think it might be a limiting belief for you because when you realize this isn't about preserving, like Jesus doesn't need you to defend the faith. Jesus needs you to pick up your cross and figure out what does it take for you to see him in everyone. If he is the light of the world, that light is not subject to the orthodoxy of some church. That is a universal light that transcends any religion. And I respect and honor the guy for his decision, but I also made it appreciate that in some sense there are people who've become something like Christian Pharisees who feel like they need to hold people accountable to you're not holding up the faith the way you're supposed to, not supposed to judge people. Pick up your cross, figure out what it's going to take for you in your life to believe that Jesus has triumphed over death and sin, and then figure out how to share that message with people. So no, I really appreciate. I love the format of your program, and I appreciate you giving me a voice.
I just can't get over the yoga thing.
Oh yeah,
I've heard some wild stuff,
yeah,
but I've never heard of that. I did not
yeah.
know. I mean, technically, yoga is kind of like exercise a little bit, so I guess.
Well, he said so, and he's not the first person. A friend of mine, she said, my friend stopped doing yoga because she heard certain poses are worshiping Hindu gods. And I was just like, I don't, how can you, I don't see how you can unconsciously worship something. Like if I do a yoga pose, I'm not suddenly saying, oh my gosh, I believe in Ganesh or Vishnu or Krishna. It does not relate. And I appreciate that is someone's perspective. That is someone's structure of the world. And really, if you read Becoming One with Christ, that's what I set out in the beginning of the book to say, if you think that the idea of Christianity is about preserving the faith and leading a good life now so you can die to go to heaven, that's not what the Bible says. the Bible says heaven comes to earth, God comes to earth to live with his people. The question you need to investigate within yourself is, how do I bring that to life within me? Because what I've come to realize, Noah, is what Jesus says in terms of the teachings, like how no one comes to the Father except through him, those kind of things, that holds more weight than anything else in the Bible. That holds more weight than the Ten Commandments. That holds more weight than what Paul says, because Jesus is the authority. And if the idea is complete unity and oneness, which is what Jesus talks about, that really needs to be the focus of people's narratives. And so, the yoga thing has been a wild surprise to me as well.
Oh my God, people, I've heard, usually when I hear wacky stuff like that, see, this is the difference between you and me about that thing. You had like this very mature way of handling it, and then here I
Right.
am, like, I would have been like, a timeout. I'd be like, it's. I
Well,
would
I
have
had,
been so mad because the whole point, and this is a side note. I've had some people on my show that give some wacky explanations of stuff, but I still post it because I'm not gonna put because the whole thing as a podcaster, if you're doing an interview with someone, you don't want to go through a whole 30-minute to an hour interview and take time out of their schedule and post it. And then at the
right.
very end go, oh, I'm not going to post it.
Yeah.
That wastes your time. That wastes the person's time. And so for any podcaster out there, unless your guest has something very out of the ordinary, if they say something very much against something, then post it. It doesn't matter their beliefs. It doesn't. But
Yeah.
it's not going against someone and saying that for political reasons. If there's one thing that you don't agree with politically, is you can't post it just on that because it kind of takes away their freedom of speech. And then if you go by a motto of, well, a certain motto that's like, oh, I tell nothing but the truth, but yet you're not letting this person say what they want to say.
And in some sense, I appreciate it. And it's not the first time it's happened. About 3 months ago or 4 months ago, I did a podcast, and towards the end, I talked about incantations, because incantations are literally how you can physically transform your nervous system. If you say over and over again, I am a genius, I am a genius, or I am a millionaire, you're going to start to think and act differently based on what you've told yourself, because you implant that impression on your subconscious mind. And I was saying incantations, and the podcast said, "Oh, incantations are witchcraft." I said, "Well, no, that's from that's contextually for witches that would might be true, but incantations are a way to change your physiology by how you speak to yourself. That's what if I mean when Jesus said, if I say, and I think I used this example, if I say, I am the resurrection and the life, or I am the way, the truth, and the life, I am incanting what Jesus said. That's what I am incanting what he said. And initially my answer was good. And then the next day she came back and said, I'm not going to post your podcast. I'm not going to post it. I'm like, okay. Right. So, I appreciate that's where she is in her journey. Like, she thinks that incantations, saying something like that, is witchcraft. And like, okay, well, that is a perspective. And what you come to appreciate, like to really appreciate, I think if you're a Christian, anyone should ask, what does it take for me to believe Christ has conquered death? Because that's what's on the table, right? Believe in me and you will have everlasting life. That's the message of Jesus. And say, okay, well, how do you physically transform yourself to get to that place? And that's what I set out to write and kind of witness to in becoming one with Christ, because I detail not just the history of the covenant between King David and God, but also my bearing the cross, what bearing the cross meant to me during the 5 years, the past 5 years, including the pandemic. So I know yeah, the yoga thing, it still makes me laugh a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think I had to say that. So, for my advice to people that are podcasters, don't don't post an episode. d- don't ever like do a whole interview and just because someone says one thing that you're not okay with, that doesn't mean you throw the whole episode away.
Right.
I mean, typically, if you don't agree with someone, that's what makes a good episode because then you can argue about it on there and get two sides. So, I mean, they're lost. I mean, they're lost. I mean, I, for any future guests, I won't never not post an episode for
I love
them
that. I love that. Well, no,
because that goes against my motto.
no, I love it. I appreciate it. Well, and it's listen, we're Earth School's a big school. And if you think that, like, I used to have this idea that, okay, if I keep my blinders on, like I'm going to be safe from the world. The world's not going to encroach. And then between going to Japan, going to Somalia, going to all these places, no, the world encroaches, and you realize, oh, I have to account for all these other people on the planet too. And then you start to say, well, I have to account for all of history. Like Jesus didn't just come to save America. Like, let's think a little bit bigger. America is 3 or 4% of the world's population. And I would like to think the Messiah is much more powerful than just the 300 million or the 150 million Republicans or whatever it may be. Let's think a little bit more bigger. And then let's think about the 110 billion people that have lived throughout human history. That's the Messiah that I want to get to know because that's the Messiah that I believe in.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate you so much again for sharing your story. But um, for people that want to find me, I'm on Instagram and TikTok. I'm Lethal Venom Podcast over there. I post episode updates about when shows are released, as well as some behind the scenes stuff and just other stuff related to the podcast. You can find it on there. On Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Noah's Podcast. And then, as always, you can get Lethal Venom wherever you listen to your podcast from. I'm available on all the major platforms. I'm on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Pandora. I mean, it's everywhere. So it's wherever you get your podcasts is there. So feel free to subscribe to it so you get notified of episodes in the future as well as when you for this episode as well. I wanted to give a huge thank you to David. Did you have any lasting thoughts before we close out?
No, like I said, I really appreciate you. I love what you're doing. I love your approach. I honor you and I wish you the best of luck.
Well, I thank you so much for those kind words, and I wish you the best of luck as well. And to my listeners, I appreciate you all so much for listening. Love y'all, and I will see you all in the next episode of Lethal Venom.